In our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, May 25th, here in South Korea. Korea's homegrown Nuri space rocket is poised to take off at 6:24 p.m. later on this Thursday evening, following an earlier cancellation the day prior, owing to a technical glitch that has been resolved. The Bank of Korea holds its interest rate steady at 3.5% for the third straight session and lowers its growth outlook for the country to 1.4% for this year. Having ended their second day of on-site inspection of relevant facilities in Fukushima late Wednesday, South Korean delegates are in Tokyo on this Thursday for bilateral talks on Japan's upcoming discharge. We start yet again in Kohung, where Korea's space rocket Nuri has been granted a new timeline for launch after an unavoidable cancellation yesterday afternoon. And for more on this, I now turn to my colleague Shin Se-byuk, standing by live at the site of Nuri's upcoming launch. Se-byuk, welcome. It's looking like the perfect weather for a space launch there.
Hello, Sunny. As you said, the weather is just perfect here.
Right, Se-byuk, let's begin then with the announcement on the new agenda.
Yes, so South Korea's homegrown rocket Nuri has once again received green light for a liftoff. The decision was made 2 hours ago in a briefing on the Launch Management Committee's meeting. Well, there was an overnight technical inspection carried out, and the communication glitch that was found yesterday has apparently been handled. Take a listen.
At around 5 a.m. today, we carried out 6 rounds of repeated testing and successfully verified its stable functionality. The Launch Management Committee reviewed the result and confirmed that we are now able to proceed with the launch.
Yeah, so preparation-wise, everything should be the same as yesterday. The process already began at 12:24 p.m. Korea time. That's 6 hours before liftoff. All 8 satellites on board are also known to be in a good position. If things go as planned, Nuri should be good to go at 6:24 p.m. Korea time, but the launch could take place in a 30-minute window either before or after the scheduled time, depending on weather conditions.
Right, the weather, of course, I'll keep my fingers crossed for that. And before you go, Se-byuk, do remind us about the importance of this upcoming third launch.
Yeah, so the upcoming launch is significant in mainly 2 ways. The first is that this will mark South Korea's first launch of commercial-grade satellite, because in the previous 2 launches, the payload was only dummy and performance verification satellites. But the satellites currently on board will carry out a variety of tasks like ground observation and constellation missions. And the second is the first participation by a private company in the project. Hanwha Aerospace, the nation's leading aerospace company, has been given access to key technology from KARI, a so-called technology transfer for the company's involvement in today's launch and 3 future launches. This is part of a government scheme to nurture the new space field in order to create a self-sustaining space industrial ecosystem. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Se-byuk, thank you for the latest from Kohung. That was our Shin Se-byuk reporting live from Nuri's third launch site to take place later on this Thursday. In other news now, Seoul Central Bank has shared intentions to hold steady its benchmark rate at 3.5% yet again and has lowered its growth forecast for Korea to 1.4% this year. Our finance correspondent Arirang reports.
The Bank of Korea has once again frozen its key interest rate. The central bank announced the decision on Thursday after a Monetary Policy Committee meeting. The base interest rate stays at 3.5%.
Inflation is slowing down, but it's expected to stay above the target level for a while, so we have decided to keep our tightened monetary policy. The Board of Governors voted unanimously to freeze the rate.
Now, this is the 3rd time in a row that the BOK has decided to keep the rate unchanged. The central bank cut the base rate in 2020 amid concerns over the economic recession due to COVID-19, but started to raise the rates in August 2021. Analysts say with the consumer price index coming down to the 3% range, May's decision reflects the central bank's intention to avoid throwing cold water onto easing inflation. Economic uncertainty was also one of the factors for the rate freeze. Amid sluggish exports, South Korea's real GDP for the first quarter of this year expanded slightly, just 0.3% from the previous quarter, barely avoiding negative growth. The country's current account balance in March too narrowly avoided a deficit for 3 consecutive months thanks to dividend inflows from overseas subsidiaries of South Korean companies. However, South Korea's trade balance remained in the red last month for the 14th month in a row. Crisis in the financial market also seems to have affected the decision, as rate hikes may intensify bank and card company anxiety, which is raised due to the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank. After the monetary policy meeting, the Bank of Korea also cut this year's economic growth rate from 1.6% to 1.4%, considering the recent worsening economic index and the weak impact of China's reopening. The consumer price index is expected to be at 3.5%. Following the rate freeze, the market widely expects rate hikes to end at this point, at least for now. With the central bank's decision to hold the rate, the interest rate difference between South Korea and the U.S. now stands at 1.75 percentage points. Lee Hyun, Arirang News.
Producer prices here eased last month in light of lower prices of agricultural products. Early findings by the Bank of Korea show the producer price index fell 0.1% in April on month. Now, this latest finding stands in sharp contrast to the 0.4% rise in January, the 0.2% rise in February, and the 0.1% rise in March. Despite the optimistic on-month finding, the bank points out on year, the index is up 1.6%. The producer price index is a key barometer of inflation as it weighs on prices of consumer goods in the months ahead. Over in the U.S., the Federal Reserve had engaged in some domestic debate ahead of its May announcement to raise rates by 25 basis points. Now, this is according to minutes of the Federal Open Market Committee in May, released on Wednesday. Several members had questioned the purpose of further policy tightening, while others had underscored the need to rein in inflation to the target range of 2%. Going forward, the committee looks to closely follow relevant data, including that of consumer prices and employment, ahead of its next meeting in June. Staying in the U.S., prospects of a default appear to be looming large as the Biden administration and the Republican-led U.S. House of Representatives remain poles apart over the fate of the country's debt ceiling. Our foreign affairs correspondent Paeun-ji explains.
With only 8 days before the U.S. government could face an unprecedented default, negotiators for Democratic President Joe Biden and top congressional Republican Kevin McCarthy reconvened for another round of discussions at the White House on Wednesday, but failed to secure a deal on the debt ceiling. McCarthy said they moved in a positive direction, but said they're still far apart.
You have to spend less than you spent last year. That's not that difficult to do. They have increased spending with the Democrats in the majority on discretionary spending by more than 33%. No household's been able to afford to do that. We can find ways, we can eliminate that.
The U.S. Congress faces a June 1st deadline to either raise or suspend the debt ceiling in order to avoid a catastrophic default. Republicans led by McCarthy have been insisting on spending cuts in exchange for raising the debt limit. They say they'll not accept a deal unless it results in the government spending less money than it did in the last fiscal year, and are pushing for cuts to 2022 levels. But the White House says the Republicans are risking a devastating default as they demand extreme spending cuts that would hurt millions of Americans. Meanwhile, at a Wall Street Journal event on Wednesday local time, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen expressed concerns and said it's highly likely the U.S. would run out of resources to meet all the government's obligations in early June, and possibly as early as June 1st.
So we are seeing some stress already in Treasury markets, and I think that should be a reminder of the importance of reaching a timely agreement.
With the growing possibility of a default, U.S. stocks fell on Wednesday, with the Dow Jones ending the day down by around 250 points. Paeun-ji, Arirang News.
In neighboring Japan, Korea's inspection team is in Tokyo on this Thursday, having ended their second day of an on-site survey of facilities in Fukushima on Wednesday to better assess Japan's radioactive wastewater discharge plan. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
A team of South Korean nuclear experts sent to Japan to inspect the Fukushima contaminated water release on Wednesday visited the chemical lab that analyzes nuclides, the plant's tritium dilution system, and the facility responsible for actually releasing the treated water. After their observation, addressing the media, the chairman of the inspection team, Ki, said they had focused on whether the shut-off valve was in place, adding that the valves are there to shut off the system if there is a problem with the contaminated water after going through the ALPS process, but before being diluted. The focus of the inspection was on where the emergency valve is and whether it's fully functional. But still, the chairman said additional inspections have to be done for them to come to a conclusion.
It's still a bit too early for a conclusion. We did check the location of the valve with our own eyes, but we still have to check how the valve works and its capacity.
He also said other items included the tools to figure out the nuclear concentration level for each radioactive material, as well as the dilution system's capacities. Wednesday's inspection lasted 30 minutes less than Tuesday's, and according to the chairman, everything on the day's agenda went according to plan. Separately, in a parliamentary session on Wednesday, Seoul's Foreign Minister Pact dismissed concerns that South Korea is only giving Japan reasons for the discharge of contaminated water by sending its own team of experts to the power plant.
The inspection team is not Japan's sidekick. Of course, the IAEA is conducting inspections, but our team of experts is also there to closely examine the facilities for themselves and let the public know what they found.
Pac also reaffirmed that the government will not lift its ban on seafood imports from Fukushima unless public concerns are eased. On Thursday, the last day of their mission, the 21-member inspection team will hold an in-depth discussion with relevant Japanese officials based on the information gathered from the on-site inspections before returning back to Seoul the following day. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
In Montenegro, bail has been revoked for failed cryptocurrency entrepreneur Do Kwon, also known as Do Kwon, following an appeal by prosecutors. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
Earlier this month, Terraform Labs founder Do Kwon and his former finance officer Han Chang-jun were granted bail of 400,000 euros, or just over $430,000 each. However, the prosecution appealed the bail, saying that neither would have any interest in staying in Montenegro once released from detention. And a higher court on Wednesday agreed with the prosecution that the payment of some $860,000 for bail for both men could not be taken as a solid guarantee. Both Kwon and Han were detained in March as they tried to board a flight to Dubai from Montenegro. They were charged with forging official documents as they were found with doctored Costa Rican passports and a separate set of Belgian passports. Meanwhile, with both South Korea and the United States seeking the extradition of Do Kwon and his former finance officer, Montenegrin authorities insist that the two must go through a trial in Montenegro before there is any chance of their extradition. Not to mention, the two would also need to finish any prison sentence handed down to them in Montenegro before they would be extradited to either South Korea or the U.S. And watchers believe that they could be facing the maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. Still, for many investors who lost money on the collapse of the Terra Luna cryptocurrency ecosystem, their fears that Kwon and Han would go on the run again have been quelled with the court's decision to scrap their bail. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Trade Minister An Deok-eun will attend the annual Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting in Detroit this week. This year's gathering, chaired by U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, will take place from Thursday to Friday, U.S. local time. There, An will share Korea's policies that seek to promote a productive multilateral trading system, one that is capable of adapting to a quickly changing business environment. On the margins of the APEC meeting, An will also engage in separate talks with his trade counterparts from major economies. On the medical front, researchers here have unveiled an AI technology that can diagnose 6 of the most common cancers in about an hour with just a few drops of blood. Our Ian Jin tells us how.
Data shows that 1 out of 3 South Koreans fight some kind of cancer in their life. More so than with any other disease, the cancer survival rate is higher the earlier it is detected, which in itself is the challenge. Diagnosis is possible only when a suspected organ is thoroughly scanned and biopsied.
Only very few types of cancer, like prostate cancer, can be diagnosed through urine or blood tests. Other cancers need more complex imaging techniques, which makes it difficult to diagnose early.
But now, a local research team has developed a technology where 6 different types of cancers can be detected with just 10 drops of blood in roughly 1 hour. First, the plasma separated from the blood goes through a filtering process to extract exosomes. Exosomes are microvesicles that carry a wide variety of DNA, RNA, proteins, and lipids, but cancerous exosomes reflect genetic alterations in their makeup, making them new biomarkers in early cancer detection. The exosome is placed on nanochips and put in an analysis machine. As light passes through the exosomes, it is projected in a graph form. An artificial intelligence that has studied the genetic information of 600 cancer patients is able to tell if cancer is detected. The 6 cancers that this technology can detect are lung, breast, colon, liver, pancreatic, and stomach.
Its accuracy for detecting cancer is over 97%, and its accuracy for determining the type of cancer is over 90%. We're aiming for the testing fee to detect 6 types of cancers at once to be around $230.
The research team plans to conduct clinical trials with their latest discovery on the different types of cancers one by one, starting with lung cancer this year, and start applying for approval by 2024. Research on developing technology that only uses blood to diagnose cancer is in full swing around the world, but one that can detect multiple cancers has yet to be commercialized. 이은진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Private satellite launching company Virgin Orbit has shut down. According to a statement by the California-based company on Tuesday, its assets are being sold and its doors are shutting. Founded in 2017 by British billionaire Richard Branson, the company aimed to provide space launches for the growing small satellites market. Unlike its competitors, Virgin Orbit used a horizontal launch method, firing its Launch 1 rocket from the wing of a converted Boeing 747. The shutdown comes after a major mission failure in January in Cornwall, where its first ever satellite launch failed to reach orbit. The company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the US in April and recovered $36 million after auctioning off its assets. The amount is roughly 1% of its highest valuation in late 2021. A paralyzed Dutchman is able to walk again thanks to implants in both his brain and spine. Still in its experimental stage, the treatment was led by a team of Swiss researchers, with their findings published in the journal Nature on Wednesday. With the help of a walking aid, 40-year-old Gert Jan Oskam can climb stairs and walk distances of up to 100 meters. 12 years ago, Oskam was told he would never walk again after breaking his neck in a cycling accident. The implants work by acting as a bridge between the brain and the muscles, giving him more control over his movements. The brain implant sends instructions to the spine in order to move the correct leg and foot muscles. Netflix has expanded its crackdown on account sharing to over 100 countries, including the United States and Germany. The streaming giant alerted users on Tuesday that their accounts can no longer be shared for free outside their households. Those wanting to add an outside member will need to pay an extra fee. For US users, it's $8 per month. But people in the same house will still be able to share an account and use it on other devices while traveling. Netflix estimates that about 100 million households have shared their passwords with people outside their homes. The move comes as Netflix looks for more ways to generate revenue amid growing competition. It introduced an ad-supported subscription in October last year. And finally, rock and roll singing legend Tina Turner has died at the age of 83. According to her spokesperson, Turner died at her home in Switzerland on Wednesday, following years of health complications. Known as the Queen of Rock and Roll, Turner won 8 Grammy Awards and was twice inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Turner dominated the music scene with R&B hits in the 1960s and early 70s, alongside her former husband, Ike Turner. She subsequently opened up about the physical abuse she endured during the relationship and was left close to financial ruin. In 1984, she staged a successful solo comeback with a multi-platinum album, Private Dancer, and the #1 hit, What's Love Got to Do With It? Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. The month of May is known to have the best weather conditions of the year in Korea, with many holidays to celebrate. It is also a month of change, making the transition from spring into summer. And we've surely had more warmer than normal days with strong sunshine lately, which is also today's weather pattern. We'll see strong sunshine with high UV rays this afternoon, so please take extra care in the sun. Morning temperatures were 2 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday, and afternoon highs are also a tad higher this afternoon, topping out at 27 degrees Celsius in most of Korea. And the air quality will be normal to good nationwide all day today. Sunny today, but tomorrow looks to be a wet one with passing rain in the forecast for most inland areas, with 5 to 20 millimeters expected, so please have an umbrella handy. Then there will be nationwide rain during the 3-day holiday weekend with a slight drop in temperatures, so please plan accordingly for your weekend. That's Korea for you. Here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That ends our Thursday afternoon newscast. We return with our panel session right after this break, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.
Hello, my name is Andrew Chernesky. I'm the ambassador of the Republic of Belarus in the Republic of Korea. Arirang is a Korean national song which goes deep into centuries, helping for the future generation to understand better the rich history and culture of the Republic of Korea. Today, we have met an opportunity to understand better the Belarusian culture. And we found that there are some things which is common between Belarus and Korea culture, even in spite of remoteness of the countries. And I think, in our very complicated world, it's very important to find provisions for making bridges between countries. And I think that studying culture and history of countries helps us to better understand each other, resonating with the word Arirang.
Oh, what's this?
유진이, I think something is wrong. Oh my God.
너와 내 거리 사이에 이 마음을 하나씩 심어.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
춥지 않은가요? 처음 태어난 이별에서 사는 우리 손잡아요.
Korea's space rocket Nuri is scheduled to take off later on this Thursday evening, following its launch cancellation on Wednesday, in light of a technical glitch detected fewer than 3 hours before blastoff. So what was the technical issue that caused the cancellation? What are pundits saying about Nuri's prospects going forward? And what are Korea's chances of gaining a competitive edge despite its relatively late space entry?
Welcome to Issues and Insiders. In this edition, we revisit Korea's space ambitions as Nuri gears up for its third space launch. For more, I have Professor Paul Yoon at El Camino College, who is also a Solar System Ambassador of NASA. Professor Yoon, it's great to have you back.
Good to have you. Thank you.
Right. I also have Stephen Clark, editor of Space Flight Now. Mr. Clark, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Yoon, in a televised briefing some 2 hours before the planned launch yesterday, that is Wednesday, First Vice Minister of Science Oh Tae-seok announced a communication anomaly between the launch control computer and the launch pad control computer. Could you explain this for us?
Anomaly basically there's a problem between communication between two computer systems. So I noticed that there's the low temperature helium supply valve, which is necessary to control the pressure of tank inside the tank of the propellant tank. That was not working using computer system. But at the same time, the manually was working. So if the Korea can resolve that software problem, Korea is ready to launch it. But also I want to point it out, delay is very common. For example, last year, NASA's Artemis lunar mission was very successful. We actually went back to the moon, we came back, but it was a delay for time. So if the Koreans resolve this software problem, the Nuri should be ready to go.
Right, and Mr. Clark, as Professor Yoon has pointed out, staying with the Science Ministry's announcement, officials have also claimed that such glitches, such delays are the norm. What do you say?
Well, I've covered a lot of rocket launches in my career as a space journalist, and I can tell you, you never schedule a trip around a rocket launch, for example, because you can count on it being delayed either for weather or a technical reason. And as Professor Yoon mentioned, a highlight of that would be the Artemis 1 mission that NASA launched to the moon last year. That mission was delayed several months last year due to a series of leaks that NASA couldn't quite get their hands around and fix while the rocket was on the launch pad. And we've seen companies like SpaceX, which are very successful in the global commercial launch market, have delays on occasion due to technical problems, valve problems, software problems, and weather. So it's not unheard of at all. It's quite common.
Right, and that being said then, Mr. Clark, Korea now has a 7-day launch window that closes next Wednesday, that's May 31st. Its next launch time is scheduled for today, that's Thursday, at 6:24 p.m. Korea time. What are your prospects, Mr. Clark, of a successful launch within this time frame?
I think the odds are pretty good, although you never know for sure because anything can crop up in a countdown because there are thousands of things that are going on in a rocket to prepare it for launch when you get down to the final minutes before liftoff. I do understand that this team has run this rocket through a full rehearsal of the countdown leading up to this launch attempt. So presumably any of those issues that could crop up or could occur in the countdown have already been uncovered and fixed and potentially resolved. So really, I do have high confidence in getting this rocket off the ground by the end of the month, by May 31st, weather permitting. But it sounds like the weather is great down at the launch site today.
Right, it really looked great, as my colleague Shin Se-byuk pointed out. Meanwhile, Professor Yoon, the upcoming third launch will be the first to load and launch a commercial-grade satellite aboard the Nuri vehicle. Could you tell us a bit more about the payload?
The Nuri is carrying 8 small satellites. One of the main satellites is developed by KAIST, so-called next generation small satellite, which is a capability to observe Earth. But one thing interesting about is this satellite could observe Earth regardless of weather conditions. So whether there's a cloud or it's a rainy days or during the nighttime, it could make Earth observation possible. So that's very capable the feature. Another small satellite is measuring the cosmic radiations near the Earth orbit. Another interesting about, there are 4 of these small satellites developed by KASI, Korea Astronomy Space Science Institute. What they do is they're doing flying information in space, which means they're flying together and for measuring the space weather. So this is a pretty interesting technological demonstrations.
Right, I see. Mr. Clark, following its launch this time around, Korea's Nuri will shoot for the stars 3 more times over a span of 4 years. Is this enough to claim that we have perfected the practice, so to speak?
I wouldn't say perfected at all. I think we've seen rockets have anomalies, have launch failures many times, even after they've flown hundreds of times. It's still called rocket science for a reason. It's quite a complex endeavor. So just a handful of launches in a few years is not going to perfect this design. And in fact, I think Korea is even starting to do feasibility studies of an even larger rocket that could eventually follow the Nuri rocket that could launch in the 2030s. So it may be accurate to view this almost as a stepping stone to a larger ambition for South Korea's space program. They want to gain some practice and some familiarity with the concept of launching a rocket into orbit on a smaller scale before they graduate to a much larger rocket that can carry maybe 10 times the payload mass into orbit.
Right. Mr. Clark, some scholars here in the country claim that Korea's jump onto the space bandwagon, if you will, has been quite late. What do you say?
Well, certainly they've come, it's a long way behind some of the leading spacefaring nations like the US, Russia, and China. But I will say that South Korea's, what they demonstrated in the last 10 years or so has been a rapid growth to get to where they are. There are, I think, 10 countries that have demonstrated the ability to get a launcher into orbit, a satellite into orbit using their domestic products. And South Korea is, I think, the first country, or only the third country in the 21st century to be able to do this. Most of the early adopters of space launch capability were back in the 1960s and 70s. So they are a little bit late to this, but I think they're taking it more seriously, and they have demonstrated more capability than some of the other recent countries that have joined this club, so to speak, like North Korea or Iran.
Right. And Professor Yoon, how do you respond to those who say that Korea's late venture into space will keep the country from maintaining a competitive edge over the global competition?
First of all, I agree with Mr. Clark that Korea started late, but it's going rapidly increasing its capabilities. I just want to point out all these incidents that when we talk about compatibility, I think you have to prove the market to the world that the world is watching what Korea's launching is about. They're watching not only capabilities. So last year, Korea proved that it could put the payload into the orbit. So that was good. But now, how about the safety issues? Is that Korea is capable to detect early detection for any potential trouble? This is a good demonstration. This time, before 3 hours to launch, Korea's detected the problem, so they postponed the launching. I think that's a very good sign to show the world that Korea is able to detect any kind of potential trouble, technical problem, for safety issues. So that's a good sign, proving the world that Korea is very reliable, has a launching capabilities. And furthermore, I want to expand one more thing. When you talk about global competitive edge, let's talk about, if you're talking on launching, yes, Korea started late, but we know that it's going to be continually growing, developed, improved. But I think I want to look at more global perspective, broad perspective. How about global economy scale, global space economy aspect? Korea is good at not only the automobiles, smartphone, or semiconductor, or batteries. We know that in the future, these are the another area that's going to be important part of a space economy. So in that perspective, I don't think Korea is less than other country. As long as if Korea can utilize current technologies in space environment, Korea is very competitive in the long run. That's what I say.
Right, and staying with that, Korea, Mr. Clark, it's the 10th in the world to have secured space launch technology, and the 7th, I believe, to have developed a vehicle that can carry a satellite worth greater than a ton, that is, all in a span of some 12 years. Could you put this pace of development into some perspective for us?
Sure. I think it's important to remember that Korea's foray into space launch capability started about 12 years ago, as you mentioned, with the launch program that they had in partnership with Russia. They actually used Russian engines on their first rocket that reached orbit about a dozen years ago or so. But they quickly pivoted to using a fully domestic design for the Nuri rocket. I think that was a smart move, especially given the geopolitical situation right now with Russia around the world with the war in Ukraine. A lot of Russian space technology is no longer accessible to the global market. We're seeing that in the United States. A lot of American companies have been using Russian engines and Russian propulsion and Russian designs and technology for their rockets. They're having to go to domestic supplies and domestic sources for those now. South Korea, with the Nuri program, made that decision long ago. So I think that was a big decision to make, an important choice to make at that point. And also, I think you talked about the capability to deliver a satellite of more than a ton into orbit. The other newcomers to space launch, like Iran and North Korea, can only launch a payload of maybe 100, maybe a few hundred kilograms into Earth orbit. And the Nuri from South Korea, we're already talking about 1.5 metric tons of mass into orbit. And South Korea has plans to grow even larger in the coming years with a more powerful rocket down the road. So we've talked about South Korea being a little bit late to this launch capability, but they already have a more capable rocket than any of the other recent entrants into this market.
Right. Professor Yun, pundits say this third launch is also significant because it will be the first under the guidance of Hanwha Aerospace as the Korea Aerospace Research Institute transfers technology to the private sector. What are the implications of this public to private technology transfer?
I believe this space exploration is sustainable only through work with the government along with the private sectors. So we don't, if the working with the government means you're only, the citizens' tax money is to continue space exploration, I think that's not, it's hard to continue just using taxpayers' money. So you want to involve private sector. So transferring technology to the private sector, like a Hanwha aerospace industry, I think that's the right way to go. This is very analogous to what NASA executed the SpaceX. SpaceX was started, and initially they didn't have any technological foundation, but NASA continues to supply necessary technologies. Furthermore, NASA provide a chance for SpaceX to grow financially. How? They give them a chance to deliver the cargo to International Space Station, also astronaut transportation. So if the Korean government can provide private sector, not only transferring technology, but also providing a way today make money through a government project, that way Korea's space industry will continually grow.
And Mr. Clark, while Korea, while it focuses on its launches, its space counterparts, I believe, appear to be working on reusable launch vehicles. Where do we stand in terms of reusable launch systems?
Yeah, this is a major trend in the global launch industry right now. We've seen SpaceX land and reuse their rockets with almost a routine schedule. Every few days, we're seeing a launch and a recovery and a reuse of a SpaceX rocket now. And they've built on that, and really they have a commanding position in the launch business right now. They have, I think they're planning up to 100 launches this year of their Falcon 9 rocket. So, you know, we're talking about their competitors in the industry maybe launching single digits, maybe up to 10 at best in terms of numbers of launches in the commercial launch industry. So when you're able to reuse the rocket, you not only are saving money, you don't have to put the resources into building a new rocket each time, you also are enabling a faster launch schedule, so you can turn around the launch pad and put a rocket that's already in your inventory on the pad, fuel it up, and launch again. So it enables a great expansion of capability in terms of launch and launch rate. And Korea, South Korea, is the Nuri is a fully expendable rocket, as is every other rocket in the world right now that's not a SpaceX rocket. But I think South Korea, with their next generation program, again, right now undergoing some feasibility study, the KSLV-3 is the name of it. They are looking at some reuse of technology and reuse of rocket components on that program. And SpaceX and South Korea aren't alone. There are a lot of commercial companies here in the United States, like Relativity Space, a rocket lab, that are developing next generation rockets that will be at least partially reusable, because that is the way of the future. That's where the market is going, because the customers, the satellite owners, want to see lower costs and higher launch rates in order to get their payloads into orbit.
Right, I see. Moving forward, Professor Yun, do you see Korea's commercial-grade satellite launch as perhaps providing Korea with the chance to build a space-based surveillance system?
Yeah, system, it's like a system that you could observe the Earth or any kind of objects out there. This time, the next generation small satellite, as I mentioned earlier, it is capable to observe clearly on Earth, regardless of weather condition, even during the nighttime. That's a very important feature for good surveillance. But also at the same time, the other satellite, Korea is learning about how to operate different type of satellite in space environment. So that is also necessary to make a better surveillance system. So through a lot of more upcoming satellite operation in space, Korea will develop great surveillance systems in space.
Right, hopefully. Mr. Clark, staying on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea has spoken of plans to launch its first space satellite, but there are pundits who've been rather skeptical about its potential success. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we did see an image of what this satellite might look like. I think when Kim Jong-un visited a facility in North Korea a few weeks ago to inspect the satellite, it looks like it's about the size of maybe a small refrigerator. And a satellite of that size, it's bigger than anything the North Koreans have sent into orbit so far, but it is well below the size and scale and capability of any of the spy satellites or military satellites that are operated by, we're talking about the big countries that are in military space operations like the US, Russia, and China. So it is a little bit larger in scale, but something of this size maybe could track things like ships moving around in the sea, maybe large truck convoys moving around on the Korean Peninsula or elsewhere around the world. But you're not going to be able to identify, individual soldiers, for example, or individual trucks or anything like that with a satellite of that size. We just saw a picture of it, I think, on your air there. So it's about the size of a refrigerator, and it's a little bit bigger than what they've launched before, but it's nothing even in the same league of the capability of the big military space powers.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, back here in the southern part of the peninsula, Professor Yoon, the Yoon administration's space campaign includes a moon landing in 2032 and a Mars landing by 2045. How feasible is this ambitious goal, do you think?
I just want to point out Korea's Lunar and the Mars mission plan is very well aligned with the NASA's Artemis program. NASA this year, last year NASA succeeded orbiting around the moon. This year, we are going to send 4 astronauts to the moon. They're going to orbit around the moon and come back. Next year, we are going to, astronaut will land on the moon, 2025. And continually, NASA will, after that, will Artemis 3, 4, 5 will continually come. So in that sense, Korea's lunar mission 2033, by the time Korea sends the payload to the moons, there are going to be a lot of activity done by NASA and Indonesia partners. So it is well aligned. So there's a great chance that Korea's lunar mission will be feasible. Furthermore, NASA has a plan to send a human to the Mars by the late 2030s. So which is, again, aligned to Korea's Mars mission. So Korea signed Artemis Accord. Korea is a very important part of the one of the Indonesia partners signed Artemis Accord. If Korea is working close with NASA and Indonesia partner, Korea's lunar and Mars mission will be very feasible. That's what I believe.
And Mr. Clark, beyond Korea, I believe a completely commercial astronaut mission that has just docked at the International Space Station. You covered it. Could you tell us a bit about your coverage?
Yes, I was there on Sunday when this mission launched from Kennedy Space Center here in Florida. This is the second fully private, fully commercial astronaut mission to go up to the International Space Station. And it's managed by a company based in Houston, Texas called Axiom Space. And they've partnered with NASA and they've partnered with SpaceX for this private astronaut mission. There are 4 people on board. One of them is a retired NASA astronaut named Peggy Whitson. She's actually the most experienced American astronaut in terms of time and space. And she's leading this team of 3 private astronauts. One of them is a wealthy U.S. businessman who paid for his seat. And then there are 2 Saudi Arabian astronauts on board that were selected by the Saudi government. Their trip is funded by the Saudi government, and they're on the space station doing some experiments for Saudi scientists in fields like biomedical research and technology demonstration, and also doing some educational outreach to Saudi school children during their stay at the space station. They're going to be up there for about 8 days, and they're coming back to Earth around the end of the month. And this is part of NASA's strategy to transition low Earth orbit, which is a few hundred miles above the Earth where the International Space Station is. Once the International Space Station is retired, NASA wants to have an economy in low Earth orbit with privately owned space stations. And a mission like this is kind of a proof of concept that that a market may exist for a commercial outpost or private space station to replace the ISS when it is retired.
Mr. Clark, some say that the start of space tourism can begin as early as this particular year. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it depends on how you define space tourism, because, this mission that I just talked about to the space station, there are 3 what I would call professional astronauts on board, the retired NASA astronaut and the 2 Saudi crew members. And then there's one person who had the resources and the wealth to pay for his own seat, which runs about $50 million based on what I'm hearing. So he paid his way. He's been a lifelong space enthusiast and always wanted to go to space, and he had the money to pay for his ticket. So that's a space tourist right there, depending on, some of them want to call themselves private astronauts or space flight participants, but he is going to space on his own accord. And the other segment of that market is what's called suborbital space. So these are missions that just go up to the edge of space and come right back down. You maybe experience 3 to 5 minutes of weightlessness, and you temporarily, just very briefly, go above the boundary of space, above the atmosphere. And companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin are in this market. And Blue Origin has already been flying space tourists to space for a number of years. And in fact, Virgin Galactic is flying a mission to a suborbital space just tomorrow. So the market is here. It's just a question of how big is the market, what are the ticket prices, and who can afford to go.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Yoon, one final question to you then. Korea and the U.S. signed a space pact during President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit in late April. What do you suppose is the significance of such deals?
The joint statement by the President Yoon and Vice President Harris signaled that there are going to be more collaboration between Korea and the U.S. Collaboration in space. So we could expect that 2 countries will work closely together to fight against climate change, or we could expect more exchange between among the students in space applications, more science collaboration, scientist collaboration. Or also, we're going to expect more technologies and research and development collaboration between these 2 countries. So I think these are the important factors that Korea's lunar and the Mars missions are possible. I think this is going to be a very important ground for the one to make Korea's future space missions more plausible and successful.
Right, hopefully you are correct. All right, Professor Yoon, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Mr. Clark, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.
안녕하세요.